You see, most people think that silence alone is the weapon in dealing with an avoidant. They assume if they just stop texting, stop calling, stop showing up, that somehow the avoidant will feel pain. And yes, silence can have an effect, but it's not the silence itself that wounds them. What really cuts deep, what truly shakes an avoidant to their core, is your emotional detachment, the kind that comes from a place of strength, clarity, and self-respect. You can be physically quiet, but if your energy is still chasing, still waiting, still hoping for their attention, they can feel it. They can sense that you are still emotionally available, that you are still reacting to their world. That's not detachment, that's still engagement in disguise. Think about this for a moment. Avoidants operate on a control loop. Their emotional survival depends on a predictable pattern of pursuit and withdrawal. When someone pursues them, even unintentionally, it validates their strategy. It reassures them that they are still in control, that the game is still in their favor. Your silence without detachment doesn't break that loop, it keeps it spinning. It's like pausing a machine without turning it off. The moment your emotional presence, even in subtle ways, continues to orbit their life, they still feel the pull, still feel the ability to manipulate, still feel safe. And that is exactly what you don't want. Real detachment, the kind that shakes an avoidant, comes from internal sovereignty. It comes from understanding that your happiness, your worth, your energy, your emotional response, they belong to you, not to them. When you stop reacting to their push and pull, when you stop needing validation or recognition, you disrupt the rhythm of their control. Suddenly, the avoidant is confronted with something entirely foreign, a person who is emotionally independent. And that's terrifying for them, not because they don't care, but because they are built to survive in a world where emotional safety is controlled externally, not internally. They are wired to avoid vulnerability, to avoid unpredictability, to avoid depth. When you step out of their gravitational field and refuse to orbit them emotionally, you break their loop in a way silence alone could never achieve. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about being cold, about punishing them, or about playing games. Detachment is not a strategy of manipulation, it's a manifestation of personal mastery. It's saying, I am in charge of my emotional world. I will not allow my worth to be determined by someone else's inconsistency. I will not bend to the rhythm of your fear. That kind of detachment radiates strength. And when an avoidant senses that you are truly not available to their games, that you are no longer emotionally tethered to their patterns, that is the moment they feel an absence far more painful than words could ever create. It's a quiet power. It's a presence that does not scream, does not chase, does not beg. It simply exists in its own sovereignty. And here's something crucial. Detachment doesn't mean neglecting your feelings or pretending they don't matter. It means you own your feelings, you validate your own needs, and you refuse to outsource your emotional security to someone who cannot provide it. When you operate from this place, every action you take or don't take has a weight, a clarity, a psychological resonance. Avoidance may try to dismiss it, may try to reassert their old patterns, may even attempt to pull you back with guilt or charm, but your grounded detachment cannot be swayed. It is steady, it is principled. It is magnetic in a way that silence alone never could be. So remember this, silence is a tool, detachment is the weapon. Silence without internal sovereignty is noise. Detachment with clarity and self-respect is power. And that power is what forces an avoidant to confront themselves not through drama, not through argument, not through confrontation, but simply by existing fully, independently, unshakably. It's quiet, it's subtle, but it resonates more deeply than any attempt at verbal confrontation ever could. It's the difference between a temporary absence and a permanent shift in their perception of you. And when you embrace this, when you step fully into this form of emotional mastery, you realize something profound. It is not your silence that hurts them. It is your life, fully lived, without them at the center, that becomes impossible for them to ignore. That is where the real power lies. That is where the shift happens. So take this with you. Silence may whisper, but your detachment roars. Live your life with full presence and complete sovereignty and watch how absence transforms into the most potent force you will ever wield. Most people underestimate the power of self-respect when dealing with an avoidant. They think, if I just wait, if I just stay quiet, eventually they'll come back. But that's only half the truth. Avoidants don't respond to absence the way most people think they respond to, a mirror of themselves. They respond to someone who no longer bends, no longer chases, no longer validates their fear-driven patterns. Self-respect is not just a personal boundary. It's a psychological force that forces the avoidant to face what they refuse to feel. Avoidants are masters at deflection. Their survival strategy depends on externalizing discomfort. They make others responsible for their emotional state. If they feel anxious, it's someone else's fault. If they feel fear, it's someone else's responsibility. If they feel attachment, it's someone else's need to chase. And here's the kicker, this works until they are confronted by someone who refuses to play along, someone who refuses to outsource their emotional security. That is the moment they meet a wall they cannot push down, a reflection they cannot deny. When you embody self-respect, you stop participating in their unconscious games. You stop explaining yourself, overgiving, justifying your emotions, or seeking validation from someone who cannot provide it. And in doing so, you create a psychological vacuum that the avoidant cannot fill. For years, they have been conditioned to avoid facing their own discomfort, their own fear of vulnerability, their own need for emotional connection that terrifies them. When you stop reacting to them, when you stop tolerating behaviors that compromise your value, you are no longer an accessory to their avoidance. You are a catalyst for their reflection. Think about the profound truth in this. People are changed not by confrontation, not by arguments, but by witnessing a standard they cannot meet. When an avoidant sees you standing firmly in your self-respect, when they see you refusing to lower your boundaries, when they see you flourishing without seeking them, they are forced to confront what they have been avoiding all along, the fact that their fear and avoidance has consequences. They are forced to measure themselves against someone who refuses to compromise their worth. And that, more than silence, more than absence, more than any passive strategy, is what shakes them to their core. Now, let's be honest, this is not easy. It requires courage because it challenges your natural instinct to explain, to appease, to rescue. But here's the secret. Self-respect is not about denying emotion. It's about owning it. It's about saying, I feel, I value, I demand for myself what I deserve, and I refuse to let your fear dictate my life. And when you live from this place, your presence becomes a force that cannot be ignored. The avoidant may try to manipulate, may try to charm, may even test your boundaries. But your steady, unshakable self-respect serves as a psychological anchor. It's not reactive, it's magnetic. It does not beg, it does not chase, it simply exists as the standard they cannot escape. Here's where most people go wrong. They confuse self-respect with punishment or withdrawal for revenge. That's superficial. True self-respect is grounded, proactive, and conscious. It doesn't rely on their behavior to feel validated. It doesn't demand recognition or acknowledgement. It simply declares, in action and in energy, that you are worthy and whole on your own terms. That declaration, more than silence or absence, is what ignites reflection in an avoidant. It confronts them with a truth they have hidden from themselves for years, that their emotional avoidance has a cost, and that cost is now visible in the way you choose to value yourself. And here's the most empowering part. When you choose self-respect, you reclaim your personal sovereignty. You no longer wait for permission, attention, or approval. You live fully, authentically, and unapologetically. And when an avoidant observes that life, your life, they are forced to reckon with it in a way that no chase, no drama, no emotional pleading could ever force. They experience a quiet, undeniable discomfort, the awareness that the person they hope to control has transcended the rules of their game. And that realization is far more powerful than any silence you could impose. So remember this, self-respect is not a tool for punishment. It is a mirror that reflects their avoidance back to them, a mirror they cannot ignore. The more you stand in it, the more they confront the truth they have been running from. And the more you flourish in it, the more they recognize, sometimes too late, that they have lost access to someone who will no longer compromise their worth. One of the most subtle yet devastating truths when dealing with an avoidant is this. Nothing hurts them more than your growth. Nothing unsettles them more than seeing you rise beyond the version of yourself that tolerated their inconsistencies. Avoidants thrive in a world of control and predictability. They rely on patterns, routines, and the familiar dynamics of pursuit and withdrawal. When you remain static, reacting to their behavior, giving them the energy they crave. You exist within their comfort zone. You become a predictable constant, a space they can control without ever feeling the need to confront themselves. But the moment you begin to grow, the moment you expand emotionally, intellectually, and energetically, everything changes. Your evolution creates a gap they cannot manipulate, a distance they cannot close, and a reflection of your value they cannot replicate. Growth, in this context, is not about impressing them. It is not about trying to make them chase or feel regret. That is a shallow misunderstanding of power. True growth is authentic, inevitable, and self-directed. It is the pursuit of your highest version, the consistent alignment with your goals, your values, and your emotional sovereignty. It is your life becoming so full, so vibrant, so unshakably independent that they notice not because you demand it, but because it is impossible to ignore. And for an avoidant, noticing that someone has moved beyond the patterns that once held them in orbit is profoundly destabilizing. It's not a tactical pain, it's a psychological confrontation. They are forced to measure themselves against your reality, and in doing so, face the limitations they have always tried to avoid. Consider this. Avoidants often operate in a world of emotional shortcuts. They avoid depth because intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires risk. Growth, however, cannot be avoided. When you are growing, you are not static. You are expanding in ways that demand presence, engagement, and authenticity. They see it in the way you speak, the way you carry yourself, the decisions you make. They notice it in the doors you walk through that they cannot follow, in the opportunities you seize that they cannot claim, in the confidence you radiate that they cannot manufacture. Growth becomes a silent, undeniable force, a reflection of what they cannot attain and what they cannot control. And that is the moment where influence shifts. You are no longer reacting to them. They are reacting internally to the reality of your life. This is why so many people fail with avoidance. They focus on absence or silence, hoping it will create a void they can exploit. But avoidants are experts at avoiding discomfort. They tolerate absence. They withstand silence. What they cannot withstand is a person who has grown beyond the confines of their influence, who embodies a life they cannot touch. Your growth redefines the power dynamic. It shifts it away from them. It declares, without words, that your life is no longer dependent on their engagement or approval. And that declaration, quiet, resolute, uncompromising, is far more transformative than any confrontation or dramatic gesture ever could be. Growth is also contagious, but not in the way people expect. Avoidants do not grow just because you grow. They often react with resistance, denial, or even frustration. That's part of the process. Their discomfort is a mirror they are seeing, perhaps for the first time, what they are not willing to become. And that awareness, subtle as it may seem, can generate a profound internal reckoning. It forces them to confront the truth of their limitations, their fears, and their patterns. They cannot chase, they cannot manipulate, they cannot reclaim the version of you that existed before your evolution. That version is gone. Your growth has made it impossible for them to continue playing the same game. So remember this, your evolution is not about them, it is about you claiming your highest self. It is about living a life that aligns with your deepest values, that reflects your full potential, and that refuses to accommodate fear, avoidance, or emotional manipulation. When you grow in this way, you do more than heal yourself. You send a message that is impossible to ignore. You show, without saying a word, that you are no longer bound by the patterns that once tethered you. And for the avoidant, witnessing that shift is one of the most powerful, unsettling, and inescapable experiences they can encounter. One of the most overlooked truths when dealing with avoidance is this: they crave predictability, not connection. Most people think absence or silence is the ultimate weapon, but the real leverage lies in removing their emotional safety net. Avoidants are experts at managing their fear of closeness by controlling the environment around them. They thrive on patterns, on knowing what to expect, on being able to predict reactions before they happen. It's how they maintain a sense of control, a buffer against vulnerability. When you disrupt that predictability, not through noise or drama, but through steady, conscious unpredictability, you challenge them in a way that silence alone never could. Think about this. Avoidants are wired to navigate relationships with a map of expected responses. They know if they pull away, someone will chase. They know if they push, someone will bend. They calculate, anticipate, and maneuver within the boundaries of predictability. But when you stop providing that script, when you stop reacting in ways they expect, you remove the safety that their mind relies on. Suddenly, their emotional landscape becomes unfamiliar. And for someone who fears exposure, uncertainty is not just uncomfortable, it's terrifying. It shakes the foundation of how they interact with the world, with relationships, and with the idea of closeness itself. This is why predictable silence doesn't always work. If your silence is paired with internal anxiety, hope, or subtle signs of waiting, it still creates an energetic pattern they can track. They may stop contacting you, but the game continues unconsciously. They still sense the possibility of engagement, the chance to regain control, the knowledge that you are still emotionally invested, even from a distance. True disruption, the kind that gets under their skin, comes when your responses, your presence, your energy, and your life no longer align with their expectations. You become an unknown variable, a person who exists independently of their patterns, whose life continues fully regardless of their involvement. And here's where it gets fascinating. Unpredictability doesn't mean chaos. It doesn't mean emotional outbursts or manipulative games. It means living with integrity, growth, and personal sovereignty in ways they cannot anticipate or control. It means your happiness is self-contained, your decisions are deliberate, and your engagement is not dictated by their behavior. This kind of presence forces avoidance to confront a truth they have long avoided. Relationships are not a game to manipulate. They are about genuine connection, accountability, and shared energy. And if they are not willing or able to meet that reality, they are left with discomfort, the subtle, nagging recognition that they cannot navigate a world where you operate on your own terms. It is important to recognize that avoidants fear unpredictability, not because they dislike excitement, but because it exposes their internal vulnerabilities. Predictable patterns are their armor. They protect them from facing emotions they cannot tolerate. When you step into a place where your life is fluid, where your emotional presence is unbound by expectation, you are effectively removing that armor. They are forced to confront what they cannot manage. A version of you that is fully autonomous, fully emotionally resilient, and fully unconcerned with controlling them. That confrontation, subtle yet profound, is far more impactful than any attempt to manipulate them through absence or dramatic gestures. It resonates on a deeper level because it challenges the structure of their avoidance itself. And here's the deeper truth. Unpredictability creates space for reflection. When an avoidant can no longer anticipate your responses, they are confronted with gaps in understanding themselves. They are forced to ask, consciously or unconsciously, why is this person unaffected by my games? Why does their life continue without my control? Why can't I predict them? Those questions, uncomfortable as they are, begin the internal work that silence alone cannot catalyze. You are no longer a participant in their avoidance. You are a mirror reflecting their limitations, an agent of awareness in the quietest, most potent way possible. So remember this, it is not your words, your arguments, or even your absence that creates impact. It is the removal of predictability, the refusal to conform to their patterns, and the embodiment of your own autonomous presence that shakes them profoundly. When you operate in this space, you become untouchable, not through confrontation, not through silence, but through the subtle, undeniable power of being a person they cannot anticipate, control, or contain. There comes a point in dealing with an avoidant when you realize that the real shift doesn't happen in their actions, it happens in your inner state. Too many people think they can change the dynamic by talking more, chasing harder, or even by strategic silence. But here's the truth. Avoidants respond to need, not to detachment, and they recoil from pressure, not from calm authority. When you stop needing closure, when you stop seeking reassurance, when you stop attempting to manipulate outcomes, even unconsciously, you step into a power that cannot be challenged. Your peace becomes the ultimate leverage. This is not about arrogance. It is about mastery. It is about claiming your emotional sovereignty so fully that their patterns of avoidance no longer hold influence over your life. And that is when the power dynamic shifts entirely. Avoidants have spent their lives navigating a world where emotional discomfort is avoided at all costs. They are wired to protect themselves by creating distance, controlling access, and managing responses to maintain a sense of safety. That safety, however, is fragile. It depends on others being reactive, predictable, and available to their rhythms of withdrawal and return. When you cease to react, when you cease to engage in ways that feed their system of control, you dismantle the structure they rely on. But the key is not silence. It is your unwavering peace, your ability to live fully without needing validation, without needing recognition, without needing them to participate in your life. That kind of presence is disarming in a way no strategy ever could be. Think about it in terms of energy. When someone operates from need, when someone clings to outcomes, when someone fears letting go, they are broadcasting a frequency that is irresistible to an avoidant. They can chase, they can manipulate, and they can even create temporary attachment because they know how to engage with need. But when someone embodies calm, when someone radiates self-contained fulfillment, the avoidant is confronted with a reality they cannot navigate. Your peace becomes a mirror, reflecting everything they have avoided, their fears, their dependence, their inability to manage closeness without control. And because they are so adept at avoidance, this confrontation is subtle, quiet, and powerful. It does not provoke them in the moment, but it resonates in their subconscious, where reflection begins. That is where transformation occurs, not through force, but through presence. Here's another profound truth. Avoidants are not often aware of what they miss. They do not consciously track the value of someone's independence or integrity, but they feel it deep down. At the level of instinct and attachment wiring, they recognize the difference between someone who exists within their orbit and someone who exists outside it entirely. Your calm, your peace, your refusal to react or chase becomes a force they cannot dismiss. And when you maintain that stance consistently, over time, they experience a quiet, gnawing discomfort, a recognition that the world and relationships can exist beyond their control. That discomfort is a reflection of truth, and it is far more transformative than silence, absence, or emotional games ever could be. The beauty of this approach is that it is not about them at all, it is about you. Peace is self-directed, intentional, and empowering. It does not rely on their behavior, their attention, or their recognition. It does not hinge on outcomes or the illusion of control. It is steady, resilient, and magnetic because it is anchored in reality. Your life, your choices, your values, your growth. And for an avoidant, encountering that kind of independence is destabilizing. They are forced indirectly to reckon with a truth they have spent a lifetime avoiding. Some people cannot be manipulated. Some lives cannot be controlled. And some hearts cannot be contained. That realization is subtle but devastating. It is quiet power, and it is undeniable. So when you think about influence, understand this: the greatest leverage you can ever hold over an avoidant is not words, not silence, not chase, it is inner peace. When you stop needing, stop reacting, and stop giving energy to outcomes outside your control, you shift the dynamic entirely. You move from being reactive to being sovereign. You move from being manipulated to being untouchable. Your calm is louder than any argument. Your presence is heavier than any absence. Your life, fully lived, becomes the force they cannot ignore. The final truth to understand when dealing with an avoidant is perhaps the most profound. You are not trying to make them miss you in a conventional sense. Avoidants do not miss people, they miss access. They miss the energy, the emotional availability, the version of you that once existed within their orbit. And here lies the ultimate power. The moment you remove access, not through silence or games, but through intentional self-evolution, you become untouchable in ways that absence alone could never achieve. They do not feel the loss in the moment, they feel it later, often too late. And that delayed awareness is far more transformative than any attempt at emotional manipulation. Consider the psychology behind this. Avoidants are wired to maintain distance as a form of self-preservation. They retreat when pressure or emotional intensity threatens them. They pull away when they sense dependence or expectation. And yet, they crave life experiences, connection, and validation. They just cannot tolerate the vulnerability required to receive it fully. When you stop being predictably available, when your life no longer orbits around them, when your emotional, mental, and personal growth take precedence, you remove the safety net that once kept them secure in their avoidance. Suddenly, they are confronted with a truth they cannot negotiate. The person they once had access to, the person who tolerated uncertainty, inconsistency, or emotional scarcity, no longer exists in that space. That person has evolved, and they cannot follow. This is why your growth, your boundaries, and your autonomy are the most powerful tools you have. They are not about punishment, they are about self-mastery. When you remove access through elevation rather than absence, The avoidant is forced to confront the reality of their choices without the crutch of blame. They cannot say you pushed them away, because your evolution is not about them, it is about you. They cannot manipulate your emotions or reclaim what they once took for granted, because your life has moved forward on your terms. That is the ultimate lesson in personal power. The more you prioritize your development, the more unavoidable your absence becomes, and the more they are forced to reckon with their own limitations. Think about it this way. Avoidance thrives in the shadow of expectation and dependency. It operates in a world where others provide emotional fuel that they themselves cannot sustain. When you become fully independent, emotionally, mentally, energetically, you are no longer a source of fuel. You are no longer predictable, controllable, or exploitable. You exist on your own plane. And the avoidant, for all the resistance to vulnerability, feels the absence not as a challenge to chase, but as a psychological weight. It is subtle, delayed, and unspoken, but it is profoundly real. They feel it, not in confrontation, not in argument, but in the quiet awareness that the version of you they once relied on has transformed beyond their reach. And here's the final layer of depth. By removing access, by embodying your highest self, you are also redefining the narrative of your life. You are telling yourself and the world that your worth is not contingent on someone else's presence, approval, or recognition. You are showing, through consistent action and presence, that your value is inherent, non-negotiable, and self-sustaining. Avoidance may notice this transformation or they may not. That is irrelevant. What matters is that your life becomes a standard of integrity and autonomy that no manipulation or avoidance can diminish. That is power. That is sovereignty. That is freedom. The beauty of this approach is that it is both subtle and profound. It does not rely on confrontation, drama, or even intention to hurt. It relies on your choice to live fully, consistently, and authentically. Your evolution, your boundaries, your growth, these are the forces that create impact without effort. They are the quiet but undeniable signals that you are no longer available in the way they once counted on. And that, more than anything, leaves a lasting impression. It forces reflection, it generates regret, and it illuminates a truth they cannot escape. What they lost was never just your presence. It was the version of you they could never create, control, or sustain themselves. So understand this. The ultimate impact on an avoidant is not created by silence, by chase, or by strategy. It is created by becoming the person you were meant to be, fully and unapologetically. When access is removed through growth, integrity, and self-sovereignty, the lesson is unavoidable and the transformation irreversible. Your life becomes the measure of what they cannot hold, the standard they cannot meet, and the reminder that some forces are beyond avoidance, beyond manipulation, and beyond control. Remember, silence alone does not hold power. True impact comes from emotional detachment, self-respect, and internal sovereignty. When you stop reacting to the avoidant, when you stop bending to their patterns, you break their control loop, your detachment becomes a mirror they cannot ignore. Stand firm in your self-respect. Refuse to justify your worth. Honor your boundaries. When you embody value and clarity, you force reflection in ways words never could. Your calm becomes a quiet force that challenges their avoidance. Your growth creates distance they cannot close. When you evolve beyond the version of yourself that tolerated inconsistency, you redefine the power dynamic. Your life becomes a standard they cannot replicate, and your transformation speaks louder than absence or argument ever could. Remove predictability. Disrupt the patterns they rely on. Live with integrity and autonomy. When your life becomes fluid and untethered to their expectations, you remove their emotional safety net. Uncertainty forces them to confront truths they have long avoided. Anchor yourself in peace. Let it radiate in every choice and action. When you stop needing closure, seeking validation, or controlling outcomes, your calm rewrites the power dynamic, your life becomes magnetic, and your influence undeniable. Finally, remove access through evolution, not absence. Grow into your highest self. Embody your worth and sovereignty fully. When you live unapologetically, the avoidant experiences a quiet, delayed awareness of what they have lost. Your life becomes the ultimate teacher, the ultimate mirror, and the ultimate force. Own your life. Honor your value. Rise relentlessly. Live fully. And let your presence, your peace, and your growth speak louder than silence ever could.